gentlemen, welcome back.
It has been a hot minute.
Too long. I've missed our discussions, man.
I have too. The last one was our episode on the election day, so early November. So,
and it's been busy. I mean, we had big plans for this year. We wanted to support our adoring fans with all the episodes that we could put out, but we forgot to adore ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. We're in our senior years, and schedules are busy. Time is crunching. We're winding down, and it was becoming hard to make time for this. But Jordan, he was right about making a little time for ourselves,
right? Which
is good. So we apologize. It's been 4 months. Essentially, because we're hitting up March tomorrow. Is the last day of February as we're recording this.
Yeah.
So
super nice outside too. Like cool. I'm looking at the bank temperature thing. Says 62 degrees.
Yeah,
a little windy.
It's a bit windy. Yeah. But either way, it is great to be back in here, and hoping that this will be a good bit more regular now.
Absolutely,
through the rest of the semester.
Because I miss this, man. I really do. I enjoy talking. I think it's great in growing us
for
in our
sure.
spiritual lives and getting us closer to the Father. So, hey, let's give it another shot. And I apologize if we're a little rusty. But if there's one thing these two dudes can do, it's talk.
Yeah,
so,
we're yappers.
For sure. So, as for today's topic, I was thinking about what could be something with a little bit of gravy that we could sort of mosey our way, but also like explode back onto the scene with. And I was thinking about the topics of free will and predestiny.
Yeah, so these are some big ones. So essentially, there are some different schools of thought relating to God's knowledge of what's happening and what will happen based on our ability of whether or not we are actually the ones making the choices, or if everything was set out before us and we really don't have a choice.
Right. And I remember I was at Bible study one night, and we were talking about Adam and Eve, and I remember just somebody asking like the age-old question, if God knew what was going to happen, then why did he let it happen? Right. So that's what we're going to be diving into today. I have some ChatGPT questions. We could touch on some Calvinistic thought, and really just yap until we feel like we're done.
Yeah, right? So first, and I think we've talked a little bit about certain free will and God's knowledge of things. So there's the idea of God is all-knowing, and with God being all-knowing, knowing. And the phrasing here, I feel like, is important. People say, like, he knows what's going to happen before it happens, or he knows what choice I'm going to make. And so then people think, well, if he knows what choice I'm going to make, then do I actually have a choice? Or is everything just planned out from start to finish?
Right. And I see the issue that I always bring up, and I believe we've talked about this on here before, is that we just think linearly on a timeline. Yes. Whereas God, I mean, whenever he introduces himself to Moses, he uses a tense that doesn't exist to us, which is why it's so hard to understand.
Yeah.
I am.
Right.
It just was and is to come.
All at the same time.
In the sense of a circular view of the timeline, whereas we can only see like forward and backward.
Yeah. Yeah, because for us, time moves in one direction, always forward, never back. Now, technically, with if we get a lot of years down the future, we can move faster through time. Like there's time dilation stuff, but we can never move backwards in time. So we're always moving forward in time. And so from our perspective of picturing a God who exists outside of time to then see all of time and experience all of time at the same time. That's that's at least how I kind of understand it, because it's less of he knows what's going to happen before it happens to me, but he knows what's going to happen as it's happening because he's looking at all of it at the same time to him.
Very good, yeah. And it's like, so the way that I like to picture it is, so you think God is at the beginning right now.
Yes.
In the Garden of Eden, looking at Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. And he's also at the end of time.
Yes.
With the people who are saved in the new earth and the new heaven. And he's also right now. And the way that I like to think about it is I have a whiteboard at my apartment. And that whiteboard, one time I was confused about this. So I just drew a timeline, and I put at the beginning, I put Eden, and at the end I put Revelation. And then I marked like major points in the Bible up until that. And then I was thinking about where God intervened. And I was like, how does this make sense? Like, do I think of God, do I think of his ultimate will as like the borders of the timeline? Or, and then I thought to myself, in this equation, and what I'm doing in this illustration, I would be God because I'm the one looking at the whole timeline.
Right. And you're seeing both points at the same time. Like I can see both of my fingers and what is happening at my hands, and I can choose to step in or affect both of them even at the same time.
Right. And something that's really cool to me is that despite being outside of the timeline, he's still very much in it. And he chooses to come down and interact with the ones he loves and the people he loves, not the robots without free will that he loves. And we'll touch on that more later, I think.
So, it's first off, we're always going to struggle as the beings that we are to try and quantify and comprehend this extra dimensional God that exists outside of his creation. And I mean, we're three-dimensional beings looking at the world in a two-dimensional view. And so we're way, way, way steps down from whatever God is.
And I mean, what kind of God is a God that you can understand?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that verse we quote all the time in 2 Chronicles, nor heaven or the highest heaven of heavens can contain thee, much less the house which I have built. So not even the heavens can contain God.
Right. And it brings up another question that I ask, is because people often bring up with the timeline where verses that it says like I chose Jacob over Esau. Whenever he says that, and like the illusion of choice, I know that that's a stereotype or that's a cliche or whatever, the illusion of choice, but the idea of choice to somebody who knows what's going to happen is interesting.
Right. And that's why it's the phrasing, I think, is where we get some of these Calvinistic ideas of predestination, of like the fact that, or like the idea of God changing his mind. Like in Exodus, when Moses is on top of Mount Sinai, God is saying, Moses, these people, you're not even down there yet. You don't know what they're doing, but man, they're messing up. I'm done. Yeah. And Moses interceded for them, which was a really great act, not even knowing all the stuff that they had done yet. And the phrasing was like that Moses changed God's mind, or like something along those lines. They're like, what do you mean he changed God's mind? And so then it brings into question, how was God moving through this scenario? Did God know that Moses was going to say these things? And so was this like a test, or was this like just what was this? And so these are these really interesting scenarios in the Bible where it starts to get a little fuzzy.
And it's just really hard. It's hard for us to understand. Once again, I feel like that's going to be I mean, we're two college kids. Like, we don't claim to have all the answers here, and by no means are we like hating on anybody who believes anything.
Right.
But a major point is just like we're trying to understand.
Yeah,
we're just conversating. Yeah, we're having a conversation about this. But the idea of choice usually seems like a crossroads. It usually seems like, man, to go further, what do I choose here? Like, I don't know what's after this. I need to make the right choice.
Right.
But how does that apply to somebody who knows what comes next?
Right.
How can it be a choice if it's just this is the one that's going to happen?
Yeah. In talking about the same analogy, so talking about like the circular view. So the flow of this circle that God is able to look at all of, I think of that as his will. Like it's always, or like a river flowing in the direction of his will all the time. Because like we always say, and it's stated in Scripture, that God's will come through in some facet. If not through me, or if something happens, his will find a way to persist.
Very true.
And so in that, the water is all flowing in the same direction. But the times where we are here, sometimes the choices we make are these little streams that like sprout off of this. The water is still flowing in the same direction. The water is still flowing in his will. And the water will rejoin back, diverge
The
off.
will watershed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in that, we have these choices that we can make. But as we know, God's will always finds a way. And we are learning how to walk in that, how to navigate this river of his will. And so we still have the power to make choices, because at least when I think of it, God is experiencing all time at the same time. From when let there be light, he is watching and existing and acting in everything at the same time for all time, like eternally. And so to think of like this idea of choice of, is it me choosing, or is it God choosing? Well, God's will always finds a way, but the choices that we make change the way that the river affects the land, which the land is, our situations, everything else around us. But the water, his will, is always flowing.
Very good. I like that a lot. And it so there's a question that I think about every once in a while. Is like, at what point can our will, I don't want to like say this wrong, but it says in the Bible that it is God's will that all be saved.
Right.
But that's not going to happen.
Right.
So, which means up to a certain point, our will, because he loves us so much, trumps God's will for our life. We have the choice to not believe.
We do have the choice to not believe, which is, I think, it's also goes back, and this is something I've thought of when God is referencing his creation in Genesis. The words that are used is that stuff is good, and then us are very good. It's not perfect because there is like this idea of free will, because free will invites an opportunity for imperfection. But in that is the ideal situation, because for God to create us to just automatically follow him, like it's like you said earlier, like robots, like it's not organic, it's not real. But in the Garden of Eden, there was this longing for God to like have relationship with us, and this wanting us to choose him, to choose his will over our own, because he's like a parent that has a kid, prays that their kid will listen to them because they know better, and the kid is gonna try and say just like, oh no, I got this.
Right.
Like it's we're talking in one of my theology classes about this idea. It's more relating to like sin and the fall of man, but like we're watching God or our parent, vault multiple stairs at a time, skipping stairs.
Oh, yeah.
And or even jumping upstairs, and the little kid is just like, you know what? Yeah, I can do that. I'm ready. I can do that
Fall on
now.
your face.
Yeah, and exactly. And they're going to fall on their face because they are not ready for that. But the parent is setting an example of what this choosing relationship is kind of looking like.
Right. And
Ish.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you think back to the very beginning, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was an action of free will.
Yeah.
From the very beginning.
Yeah.
It wasn't that, I mean, like, if you think about it, since that was there from the foundation of Eden, and the rule was don't do that, even if he knew, he was giving us the ability to disobey him from the very beginning.
Right. Because I think if you have the choice to choose something bad over something good, it means that much more when you choose something good.
Right.
Because if you're just, default setting doing good all the time, well, then good doesn't have a reference to itself.
Yeah.
Because a good decision is a good decision because there are bad decisions.
There's a quote from a video game that I used to play that says, "What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort?" And yeah, it's pretty sparse. It's pretty bars. But yeah, I think that kind of encapsulates what the struggle looks like for people in their quest to do right in God's eyes,
Right.
And another thing that's worth mentioning is it gives you an entirely different appreciation for who Jesus is whenever you think about it's omniscience, so the all-knowingness, and we'll apply that to his view of the timeline. Because whenever Jesus was down on earth talking to the Pharisees, he said, "Before Moses was, I am." Right? So for us, it's like, that's improper grammar.
Yeah.
Like, before Moses was, I am. It doesn't really make sense. But for them, they had that tense. They knew exactly what he was trying to say.
Yeah, he was saying that, like, before Moses, I was there, I was here, I was there in the
says,
future.
boy, I'm running circles around you on this timeline. So
Yeah.
I was there.
Yeah. I saw this cool, it's a little bit separate, but I saw this cool like story analogy of like, we're good bit into the future. We've somehow, it's not technically possible, somehow figured out time travel back in time.
Okay.
And so there's this today age person that goes back in time and happens to be at the time of Jesus and walks up to him. Let's say they were an American speaking English, and then they walk, and as soon as Jesus sees them, speaking to them in perfect English, like, hello, insert name.
Right.
It's just like, how do you know me? He's just like, well, I saw you come back here.
Right.
Like, I just saw this happen, and I saw it happen yesterday or saw it happen tomorrow. It's just like, what does that even mean?
Right.
It's just like,
At what point is Christ, like, whenever he rose from the dead, was he not human anymore? Like, was he still, because I know it said like he in his true godly form during the oh dang it, the word is slipping my mind, whenever he's up on the mountain with Moses and Elijah, do you know what I'm talking about, right? And all the, gosh dang it, it's on the tip of my tongue, it's not important. It's one of those big Asian words. Whenever he's up on the mountain, he goes and then descends into heaven.
no.
You don't know what I'm talking about?
Anyway, your point.
I was just gonna say, like, Christ at some point knew everything, even whenever he was on earth.
Yes.
That's my point.
Yeah. And so then that brings up there's the huge conversation of Judas.
Oh,
Judas and the idea of free will and Jesus knowing is, I feel like, such a huge topic of conversation of like, Jesus needed to die for our sins. Like, that was part of Jesus's mission down here. Like, Jesus knew the will of the Father and what he had to do. And so, and as we know, God's will is always going to, as we said, God's will is always going to find a way to push through and happen. And in thinking about Judas's role in all of this, of Jesus saying, knowing like, one of you will betray me, and they're all asking, is it me, Lord? Is it me, Lord? And Jesus is knowing, he knew this the whole time. He knew this when he brought Judas on as a disciple. And so then there's the question of, did Judas have a choice, or if it wasn't Judas, would it have been Peter? Would it have been somebody else? I feel like it could have been any of them, but because there is, there's flaws in all of us.
Imagine how crazy it would have been if it was Peter.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I think it would have been someone, just Judas happened to be the one to choose first. And in that he made that choice, but he was still, in the really weirdest way, following along with God's will and God's plan. And then, Judas knew like what he did afterwards and did not sit right. But then there's the question of like, okay, well, where is Judas? Because if Jesus was meant to die and Judas played a part in that, was he following God's will then? Or was he sinning, or was he? And it's such a weird conglomerate of questions. It's like, are we going to see Judas in heaven? And so,
that's a good question. It was the Transfiguration, by the way.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was talking about.
Gotcha.
And they might have even had events flipped there for a second, but that's the word. It was going to bother me. I couldn't remember what it was called. But yeah, I heard a pastor speak maybe about a month ago talking about how the greatest sermon ever preached wasn't the Sermon on the Mount. It wasn't like the Beatitudes. He said it was probably Jesus whenever he was risen from the dead. I think it was the road to Emmaus, just talking to those two people. You know what I'm talking about? Because, like, imagine that. This entire time, Jesus has had to keep his mouth shut about how, like, he had been interceding in human events since the dawn of time.
Right.
Think about it. Like, all the things that we refer to as Christophanies.
Right. We've talked a lot about that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And
So all of those, he gets to be like, guess what? I was there.
Yeah.
And he gets to talk to these people on the road, and he gets to explain to them how he's had a hand in every part of human development since the beginning.
Yeah.
Which is so cool to me, because he's like, that's me. That's me. I was there. And like, I would appeal to like the human side. Like Jesus, I bet, was like, I get to talk about me. in the most humble way.
Yeah.
He's like, I get to talk about me. I get to talk about what I've done. Like, my part of this
Right.
is finally fulfilled.
Right.
I get to explain it, because
Yeah.
before then he couldn't have explained it to people.
Right. Yeah,
So-
because he was very cryptic with questions about his state of divinity. Just like are you the Messiah? You asked the question. You're
Right.
the one who's stating it. You have said so. And so he was always so cryptic about this. And I think because partially it's already hard to comprehend and understand that somebody, like a person, is God. And so, like, I think we'll just stick with this for right now, because if I start going into too much, their brains aren't going to be able to grasp it
Oh yeah,
now
exactly.
or ever.
Exactly. Those guys on the road to Emmaus must have been like, what?
This is like, what was in that wine, man?
Yeah, seriously. But I guess to answer the question that we started out with and that we sort of danced around but never really asked,
Yeah.
was if God knew it was going to happen, why did he let it happen?
Right.
Because he loves us. That's
Yeah.
the answer.
Yeah. So there's this is a big one, and this is not one that I'm going to answer as in to say that I know, but in trying to understand the character of God and our relationship interaction with him as and I've talked about this in kind of how I perceive God and scientific thought and their how they intertwine and such. And it's an idea of like God set things in motion, not so that he would be, fixing and meddling, all the time and trying to make it better. But it's like if I build something and I press start, I just want it to start. And like, I will have planned it to run as I planned it to run. Now, every now and then, there's maintenance, but it's not
Right.
like I am walking with it every time, all the while, like making sure every single perfect thing, is happening.
Yeah.
Like that's, at least in my understanding, that's if I was a creator of a creation, I would hope that I created it to just run, and then only in like the either very smallest ways or certain specific ways I would work with it, but not
Micromanagement.
I didn't create it to micromanage it.
Yeah.
I created it to run, and then when it needs help, I will help it. But then that's the question. It was just like, well, there have been some times where we could have used help in this hurricane, in this
Right.
earthquake, in this war, in so many things.
Disease. And,
Yes,
Yeah.
there's all these questions, and like that's a common question of Gnostic thought and atheist question of just like, well, if God is all loving and all powerful, then why did we have to go through COVID? Why did we have to go through 2 world wars? Why all of this? Why did he let this happen? And it's not a question I don't think we can fully answer or ever understand, but I think it is something along the lines, at least in my perception of how I can come to terms with this, because there's sometimes I get angry of like, okay, God, this seemed like the time for you to do something.
Intervene,
But
right.
you didn't, and why? And it feels sometimes like humanity as a whole is a person growing up. The Israelites were children and or a child, and God intervened a lot with them. He was telling them like, all right, here's all the laws, here's all the rules, don't touch the cookie jar, don't touch the oven, don't do all of this. And then they were messing up constantly, so God was like, okay, all right, we got to fix this, because as a parent is parenting a child in the toddler stage, you got to micromanage a lot. But as they grow up, there's times where you start to loosen the reins a little bit and allow them some more autonomy. And I think one of the key points was Jesus.
Yeah.
Was
For sure.
When Jesus entered, it was like this, okay, I'm leaving my spirit with you.
Right.
In that you will be led through the Spirit and understand how to use what I've taught you now.
Yeah.
Like, you're starting to grow up. Not saying that you're all grown up or that we're all grown up, but it's like you're starting to... You need to use what I've taught you.
That's another...
And part of... In the hardest way, sometimes part of learning is falling a bit.
Oh, yeah. Why do we fall?
So we can get back up.
Yeah, so we can learn to get back up.
Yeah.
So in the book of Romans, I thought it was a bad translation when I first read it. And one word sort of changes your idea of it. But he says in reference to people before and after the death of Christ and what it did and what it means.
Yeah.
He says, I will love those who I did not love before. Well, when you think about it, before, he was able to show love to the Israelites because those were God's chosen people. The Hebrews, the promise of Abraham, all that stuff. But Abraham's promise went further than just the Jews, just the Israelites.
Yeah.
It went to the Gentiles, too. And that verse changes with the word that I said, show. If you say, I will show love to those who I could not show love to before, then it changes to him being able, like him now being able to. Like, so the idea of a different God on the timeline isn't changed. It's the same God, but Jesus coming down and implanting himself within the timeline gives us a better idea for how, like, he was just able to do different things. So, like, certain aspects of God show, which is another interesting part, because, like, on the circular timeline, if you can see the whole thing, he wasn't able to impart himself upon the whole thing.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Yeah. No, that's because I think we get, I mean, like that, we get little snippets of Jesus displaying how he knows as well. Like he knows and he experienced and was there. I mean, beginning of John, the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And so that's already a statement of that Jesus was there right from let there be light and playing in the hand. And I think specifically in the idea of like show love or choose to love those from before, thinking also pointing to the fact of loving the Israelites and or like everybody pre-Jesus, because there was also the question of just like, well, what about everybody pre-Jesus? Because we've talked about this before of like, you know, who made it to heaven? What about all the people before that? And the idea of that, like, well, in part of Jesus is what he did when he went down into hell and descended down into hell and, you know, kind of broke stuff loose, that he was setting free those people from before. And then there's also the question of like, well, were they there long, or was it, you know, an instant, or what was it? That I don't really know.
I don't even know if time, like, as we understand it, is anything to God.
Oh.
Is time just simply a human construct?
I feel like yes. Honestly, 100% yes. Because God doesn't have to wait. Like,
no, he doesn't.
And also, if you think about somebody who is eternal, you know, an hour to us is not even worth an atom.
Yeah, what does it say in James?
Oh, it's the 1,000
a day is like
years.
1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day.
Even more so. Even more so. To an infinite level.
Inexplicably, yeah.
Yeah, and so I would like, it's also, people have thought about like when some people said that when we go in heaven, like everybody's getting there at the same time, or that, you know, when your parents die, you know, they'll go up there and, you know, 2 minutes later, then you'll be there. And because time is moving differently, but time is definitely a governing construct of our universe. In order for our universe to function, God made time, but he doesn't experience time the same way. We don't even know how, if he experiences time at all in any definition of the word that we can give it.
Well, and it's sort of like it's encapsulated by the idea of eternity. But sometimes the idea of eternity is like, especially for those like newer Christians, the idea of worshiping God forever in heaven doesn't sound like that great, because our idea of forever is like, that's a long time. Right.
There's the idea of that it will feel long, but it's just like, I can't remember, you know, not existing. Like I've been living.
Exactly.
I mean, I have, you know, my earliest memories, but it's not like I remember not having a memory. And so in thinking of, where was I going with this? So in thinking of eternity in heaven, it's not like I'm going to have another type of block, or remember not being, or remember being, or even experiencing time in any facet that we do here. Like, there's also the question of something that I think is a really cool thought. It's a little bit maybe out there, but I think it's said that, you know, there'll be work for us to do in heaven. And in thinking of, okay, well, what's that work going to be, and who are we working for? And the cool thought of in heaven, we then start to look at the human timeline the same way God does. And in some of our works, what if it's some people that are, touching down in different times? We're like, what if when I end up in heaven, then there'll be somebody 300 years ago that I somehow help in a certain way. And it's like 300 years ago from now, but that happened before me. And so then it's this weird paradox. Yeah. But I think it's kind of cool to think that, when we're up there, we will also, because we'll be outside of time, we may see time the way God does, which is all at once. And so if we're helping and working, then, we can poke little areas.
It's almost like eternity isn't a quantifiable number. It's almost like it's a place.
Yeah.
Because you can't quantify it.
Right.
So it's like you're not like going to eternity. You're not spending time till eternity. I think it's you're in eternity. This is, you don't have to think about time anymore. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So like 1 second, like what it says in James that I mentioned earlier, literally it is that way because the concept of time doesn't apply to you anymore.
Right.
Which is why it's so precious to us on earth. People live their lives saying like, well, what they say about Tony Stark's dad, no amount of money could buy a second of time.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad, but it's so true because people go out living the American dream or whatever dream they have and then have no time for the things that are important, which is why like eternity's big.
Right.
It's a big place.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And we got to use our time on earth wisely.
Right. And that's like, there's some of the ecclesiastical
Solomon?
writings of, everything is futile, nothing matters, the kind of emo angst of that, of just like, what happens here doesn't even matter. Like, we're just floating along. Like, I mean,
it's
in
all
essence,
meaningless.
in essence, we're just kind of floating along, and maybe not every one of us is going to, move mountains the same way another person might, but the things that we do are still streamlines on that same river of God's will. Yeah. And they're, I'm a word picture guy.
Yeah, man, I like that. I also like, if I could speak for myself, I also like the idea that eternity is a place.
I think I feel like that's, because the idea of what Eden was, if depending on how we understand Genesis, Adam and Eve just they weren't born and raised up as a kid. They were just existing. And, God was walking through the garden, and in an ideal situation, they were just there with each other, having relationship, and they were surrounded by God's creation. But they were experiencing God in a full way, in a place, because there's also the conversation of, was Eden a place on earth, or was Eden something else?
Well, is it Eden in the east, Tigris and Euphrates River, and
right?
All
it does,
that
and
stuff.
we do have the Euphrates and the Tigris River over in the Middle East, and so you could technically put a label on it, but it's like, is Eden like a place that we can find? Like, if I dig down, am I going to find the angel with the flaming sword or something, or is this like more of a, was it a spiritual place?
Right.
Or is this some kind of alliteration to what heaven is? And were they like cast out of heaven and sent down into the real earth?
Yeah. And I mean, if you think also, speaking more onto this, like eternity as a state of being rather than an amount of time, is that things scientifically move from a state of order into chaos, right?
I think both and.
Both and?
Chaos and order. Everything is chaotic. Everything is also in order. And it's weird.
Well, I can at least speak for the human.
Yeah.
Like you're born relatively in order, and then as you get older, you move into chaos, right? And that's one of Newton's laws, isn't it?
No, Newton's laws are more about forces and.
Okay, well, I won't speak into something that I don't understand, but still, it remains the same. Things change. If something is stagnant forever, then the idea of time ceases to be reliable, ceases
Right.
to matter at all. If things
Right.
don't change, and the amount of time passing has there's no point.
Right, because the only reason why things happen is because of the governance of time.
Because things change.
Right, but in order for change to happen, that means that there needs to be time for the change. There needs to be a before and after. And so if there's before and after, that means that there's at least a minuscule amount of time to a large amount of time. And so if we think of eternity as all of time or no time or however, then we're just existing.
We think of the end of time as like in Revelation, like the end of all of our worries, all of our suffering, like all that stuff. But you could also think of it as the end of time mattering, because it's from this point on, nothing's going to change.
Right.
You know,
We're always going to be in relationship
time
with God.
is a personification of things changing. Because
Yeah.
it is just a human construct.
Yeah. Yeah. Time is just a label that we gave to this idea of like seeing that at this point something was this way, and now at this point it's here. And it's like also the weird thing of just like you're older or you're younger now than you are right now. Like I can't go back to that because it's, time is changing. And time is change.
And our bodies are deteriorating in those seconds, even if it's the most minuscule amount.
Yeah, but I mean, cells are dying and replacing themselves all the time.
Right, and these things change, but at some point, that's not going to happen anymore.
Right, yeah. I like that it's not the end of time, it's the end of time mattering. Mm-hmm. That's, because when we're in heaven and with God, time won't matter.
No, it doesn't.
Because it won't feel long, because we're thinking of time as in our earthly idea of it, and it won't be. You can't quantify eternity in the same way, like in math, like we say that something goes to infinity, but we say that pretty flippantly. But like infinity, we can't get there, and it's not even a number. It's an idea,
right?
And we just gave a word to it.
And it perfectly answers that question that atheists love to ask all the time. Like, well, if God's been forever, then who made God? Like, you're not talking about the same one here, buddy. Like,
right. It's just
your understanding of time. Yeah. It's your understanding of
the idea,
before and after.
Exactly. But with God, there isn't a before and after. Yeah. I mean, people have had theories of just like, oh, well, there could have been an Earth before us, or like this could have been it. Like we might be in a repeating cycle.
When did time start mattering? That's the real question. And when is time going to stop mattering?
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, and it's even there's something cool when I think of stuff in science. So God's very first words, "Let there be light." Light is the fastest thing in the universe. Nothing can go faster than light. And in that, when something moves at the speed of light, it changes how time functions. Because the faster you move through space, the slower you move through time, and everything else around you appears to be going faster. And so if you think of like, this is the first thing that God made, and if God is in essence light, which is this non-measurable speed that he is experiencing and looking through everything like in such a slow manner, like maybe it's a second, maybe it's an hour. This is just trying to give a label, but everything else around him or us is moving so fast or almost in an instant. And that just, things like that are just fascinating, because it's like God had purpose when he was making things and deciding things, and he understands, I was about to say understood, but that would have been like time stuff, but he understands how we perceive the world and is trying to prepare us for that next level of perception. There's even thought of because there was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then there was the second tree where God said tree of life, tree of life, because God said if they eat from this, then they will be just like us, or something along those lines.
It was so you can eat from any tree in the garden except for the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the serpent tricked them into eating from the tree of knowledge, and he told them that if they ate it, they would be like God.
Right.
The tree of life, I'm not sure that they ever ate from the tree of life.
Okay, so God did not explicitly forbid eating from the tree of life, but you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. And then after they had ate, then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, this is maybe KJV, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat, and live forever, eternally. Therefore, the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. Drove out the man. So he never forbade eating from the tree of life, but there was the thought of like, if they eat the tree of life, then they will live forever. And so, what if we were meant to one day eat from that tree?
Yeah, well, I mean, Lord knows how long, literally, how long that they were in the Garden of Eden before that. I mean,
exactly.
It's not explicitly said.
Right, yeah.
No?
We don't know how this state was. We were only giving, the starting and the kind of the fall point. Yeah. But in thinking of like this tree of life and how that relates to us of like they will live forever or live eternally, of like what if like when we die from this earth, die physically, and we're lifted up spiritually, what if that is the almost of the eating of the tree of life? Because we're in essence becoming our true versions of ourselves.
I mean, Christ says he is the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah.
And if he is the life, and in the Eucharist, I'm putting this in quotations, we eat him.
Yeah.
Whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Essentially,
yeah.
kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
If you want to look at it in that sort of sideways way. But
yeah. And I mean, we haven't talked a whole lot about then all the issues with some of the problems with predestination.
Yeah, I was going to say we went on a time.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been good, but like part of the problem with predestination is that it takes away this free will that is explicitly given to us, and I think also dependent, as I mentioned earlier, dependent on how you phrase things, predestination has a grounds of making sense.
Yeah.
Because if you say, well, God knows what I'm going to do before I do it, then do I even have a choice? Well, it's just like, well, it's the way you're trying to conceive it.
Yeah.
It's like you're thinking that God is looking at the same timeline you're looking at in the same way you're experiencing
The problem isn't the tank engine, it's all the carts on it. So that ideology of predestination isn't wrong. It isn't. But whenever you start to dig a little deeper into, and honestly, I feel like in order for us to do justice to Calvinism, Arminianism, Wesleyanism, in order to do, I think we need another episode because you could talk about that for a long time. Yeah. And I don't want to hit it in the amount of time that we have left.
Right.
So maybe that could be next week or the week after that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think we could talk about time like we did.
Right.
And I will say it's been enlightening.
Yeah. It's been pretty cool. So yeah, I guess in wrapping up our time.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. This is first off, it's been really good just getting to theologically nerd out.
Right. Be
again.
back.
Yeah. And looking forward to doing this. You may have been seeing some video. You may have just been hearing some audio. Maybe a mix of both. As we said, we're a little rusty. And my engineering brain isn't always great with cameras, with everything that
I'm definitely not.
Yeah. But anyway, we've got a week next week, and then after that we have our spring break. So hopefully we'll get another episode next week before
we could even do
spring
2
break. Yeah, we've got time. But I guess for now, let's see if I can remember this. So this will it'll be on YouTube. I'm also going to update stuff on everywhere else, so make sure that the episodes are all up to date on Spotify, on Apple, on whatever you listen or watch. Also, get back on the Instagram, getting some more regular posting come in. Stuff has started to settle in as we've been getting going this semester.
Right.
So we're kind of more on a good flow and have an understanding of when and how we can do things. So hoping to finish out this season strong.
And welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
So I'm Jordan Peternell.
I'm Judson Page.
Love you all. God bless.